Afternoon, Detroit Economic Club members, and welcome to our first ever virtual Young Leader meeting. It's great to have you along as we make DEC history together. I'm Steve Gregorian, CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Certainly hope everyone's healthy, and we look forward to getting back together in person when safe to do so. So let's get started. Our guest today is Mike Ritchie. Mike is the president of Comerica Bank-Michigan. He has spent 29 years at Comerica Bank and was named president of Michigan in 2013. Mike did his undergrad at Wayne State, and he holds an MBA from University of Michigan. He also serves on a ton of boards, and the one that he serves on, which I most care about, is the Detroit Economic Club. So Mike, welcome. Thank you for your time, and thank you and the Comerica team for supporting our local small businesses during this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. This is great to be here. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. And I think it's neat that this is the first time we've done this format. I know many of you have done similar things as we've gotten through this, and we're building a lot of muscles, so to speak, in how we're learning to interact with each other. So it's a real delight to be here, and it's a real delight to work for Comerica and have an opportunity to impact so many people, including small businesses, as you mentioned. And I can't wait to get going.
Well, let's go. So when you and I talked about this opportunity, you proposed an intriguing topic, which we really haven't had from the other executives who have addressed our young leaders. And that topic is train your minds to go against the grain. So let's get into that a little bit. So I guess let's start with, why should we train our minds to think differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, to me, that it goes with the name of the group, right? I mean, the group's Young Leaders. And, you know, leadership implies you're going maybe in a different direction than other people are going. You know, a small leaf can ride the front of a wave, and you know, just because you're out front doesn't mean you're leading. You know, if you kind of are always going with the crowd, how is that leading? Or if you're always thinking like everybody else, how is that leading? Frequently, the crowd is wrong. You know, the crowd acts out of fear. You know, it often acts out of peer pressure. It acts out of, you know, what everybody else is doing. And, you know, we're social animals. So that's, for the most part, for societal cohesion, that's probably a good thing. But, you know, there's more followers than leaders, of course, and we need followers. But to be a leader, you need to be able to think different than the crowd. And today, I think that's becoming harder and harder than ever, because the pace of information that comes at all of you is so frenetic. It's so fast. It's so surface level, you know, and it's really hard to get behind every, you know, the depth of what is being presented to you. It's presented like it's the first time ever. In fact, many times it's not the first time ever. It's something that's happened in history. Maybe it's happened 500 times before, but you're not getting the depth. Some of the information is voyeuristic. It's narcissistic. You know, so, and if you're going to be a leader, and when I think of leaders, they need to be able to detect a pattern. You know, which way should I go to lead this group? And if you're constantly just following the crowd or getting information at the surface level in the way it's coming at us all today, it's going to be extremely difficult, I think, to be able to detect patterns and to actually lead people that you're hoping to follow.
Do you, in order to help detect patterns, are there a couple of media that you read consistently that you trust?
Yeah, you know, that question really is sort of like, how do you go about, you know, thinking differently, so to speak? And number one, I would tell you, is you got to start by sort of cleaning yourself out, in the sense that you have to cut out the poison. I think a lot of what is presented to us today has a poisonous effect. You know, if you're a big consumer of, let's say, the TV chat shows and this and that back and forth, I don't find those personally to be healthy. I watch none of that. Even a lot of the social media, the way it comes at you and the way it comes at us, I personally find it to be, it's stressful, it's anxiety driven. So you have to sort of clear your head, number one. Number two, I recommend silence, you know, and so not only cut out the poison, but take some time to put the devices away, take the noise out of your life a little bit, whether that's when you're driving in the car, whether that's in the evening. You know, I talk to people and they say, well, I can't do that. Well, if you can't do that, that's a sure sign you have to do it. You know, you say, I can't put my phone down, or I can't turn my computer off, or I can't stop accessing the different social media that I go into. If you're unable to do it, then you must do it. I'm just telling you that right now. And so cut out the poison, sort of clear your head, keep silence. But then to your question, Steve, a lot of it's time horizon. So again, going back to what I was saying before, much of what is presented today is presented in bits and pieces and very, very, very short-term time horizons, sometimes within the last minutes, hours, certainly not longer than a day old information that you're getting. And so try to format yourself. Okay, you got a little bit know what's going on. I recognize that. You can't live in a cave. You sort of have to be able to function, and trust me, there's so much coming at you. You will be, even if you're purposely not consuming it, you're going to get it anyways. But I look at it like, if you have the choice between, let's say, consuming something in the form of a tweet or consuming something in the form of an article, that's a longer thought process. Take the article over the tweet. You have the choice between consuming something that's a weekly versus a daily article, let's say, or a daily thought piece. Take the weekly. If you have a choice between a monthly, take that over the, and on and on and on. So a book is better than a monthly, so longer time horizon. So cut out the poison, silence, time horizon, that's 3. And then I would say the 4th one is seek out deeper topics. What are you actually consuming that you're reading about? It's fun to read. I mean, look, I love sports and I like politics and I like things like that too, probably like a lot of you do. And I find it interesting. But what are you really searching for, especially if you want to be a leader? Remember, this is all about leadership, in my opinion, and the topic is sort of how to train your brain differently, but for the purpose of leadership. So what are you seeking, and the deeper topic that you're seeking? So if you're consuming information and it's helping you discover truth, if it's helping you discover goodness, if it's helping you discover true beauty, inner beauty, that's a good sign you're on the right path. So what are you reading? If you're reading books on religion, if you're reading books on philosophy, if you're reading history, if you're reading biographies of great figures, even if you like to read fiction, maybe you read a historical fiction, that sort of helps you, get a deeper sense of the world. It's really key. And then last one I always say is seek out wisdom. There's a lot of really, wisdom is different than brains or different than smartness too, by the way. But seek out wise counsel. So the old saying goes, hey, it's great to learn from your own mistakes and you have to learn from your own mistakes. Hey, I agree with that. If you make a mistake, for sure, learn from that. But what's even better than that is learn from other people's mistakes. We don't have to start from scratch all the time. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, a lot of words for wisdom. So those are the keys, in my opinion, in terms of the how to help you to think different.
A couple of follow-up questions on that. So you talked about spending some time quieting your mind to think strategically. Do you set aside a certain amount of time per day or per week to do that? Do you have a regularly scheduled block on your calendar?
Well, I would say for one, just as a hobby, I enjoy reading just as a general hobby. So if, I would tell you, if you looked at my library, if you asked my kids, like, what is dad doing all the time? I'm just reading. So when I have a spare moment, I'm consuming kind of information in the way I talked to you about earlier. And I get a lot of different sources of information. So yeah, I do set out time typically at night, at the end of the day, usually starting around 9 o'clock until I fall asleep, and then the other thing I do every morning when I wake up, I try to have a silent hour. For me, it's a prayerful hour, but it's an hour of reflection. It's an hour of thinking. It's an hour of reading. So usually an hour in the morning, early, like really early when it's quiet, kind of going back to my silence point, and then in the evening. The day is too packed, to get, for me, it's too, there's just too much action going on.
Yeah, and another follow-up, you talked about seeking out wise counsel. Do you have a small little personal board that is your counsel?
I wouldn't call it a personal board, but for sure. I mean, I've always been attracted to being around older people, as an example, that have gone through different experiences. So it's been different folks at the bank that I've learned under. There's been multiple of those. I would tell you my mom and my dad, I consider two of the wisest people. I'm super blessed in that regard. My brothers, and similar. I have 3 or 4 really, really close friends that I can talk to, that are outside of the company that are helpful. Our pastor at my church is one that I go to. And then I would tell you, I'm always talking to Carol, my wife. I mean, her and I speak constantly, and she would be the first person I lean on. So it's not a formal board, so to speak, but yeah, I'm very blessed. I'm around a lot of people that have been willing to coach me, so to speak.
So smart man, Carol is the CEO of your family. I like that.
Right, for sure, for sure.
Let's shift a little bit and talk about some of these young leaders they're in position of leadership while maybe looking for that next step in their career. So are leadership and career advancement the same thing, and do they always go together in your opinion?
No, they're not the same thing. And this is again one that maybe when you're younger or newer in your profession, it's hard always to grasp it. They do frequently go together, but they are absolutely not the same thing. So, I always think about it like this. If you're following somebody that is just using that position that they're in, look at yourself, think of yourself looking at your manager. If your manager is using that position primarily as a springboard to another position or another opportunity, how inspiring is that for you? Or how much do you really want to follow that person? Or even worse, how much do you really trust their motivation in terms of where they're trying to take you? Now, I would tell you, if you do the right thing, very frequently as a leader, the good parts go with it, but not all the time. It doesn't always exactly sync up. So one of the things I always tell people, and I think this works really well for your career personally, and I think it works really well for leadership credibility as well, and that is do a good job in the job that you're in. I think today it kind of goes back a little bit to the frenetic pace I talked about earlier, or sort of the surface level, or constantly thinking you need to change all the time. The idea or the thinking seems to be, hey, I really need to map out my career. I need to think in steps, and I'm going to do this for 2 years, and I'm going to do that for 2 years, then I'm going to do this other thing for 6 months, and the next thing for 9 months. And I'm not saying don't do any career mapping. I'm not saying don't be, opportunistic or seek out opportunities. Certainly, I would tell you I didn't get here in the position I'm in by not ever raising my hand. You have to raise your hand. But your primary focus should be just do really good in the job that you're in. And most of the time you're going to get noticed. People will then approach you and ask you to do other stuff. And then the people that you're working with, when they see that that's your core, that's what you're about, that you're just focused on the task at hand and doing the right thing in the job that you're in for the team, especially if you're a manager of a team, they will start to trust you and they will want. Now, it may then be that others in the organization will see, hey, you know what? People like following this person. This person has good results. We're going to tap this person on the shoulder and ask her to take on a higher level position. And that could go that way. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. I have to tell you that.
Yeah, so you've kind of addressed, I'm a baseball guy, everybody knows that. I like to use baseball analogies. You're always going to get curveballs. You get them daily, monthly, weekly. In your life, you're going to get curveballs. So let's maybe talk about disappointment. Everybody's struck out with the bases loaded. Everybody's skinned their knees in their career. I'm guessing it's probably happened to you. How have you dealt with disappointment?
Early in my career, you asked a question earlier, do I have a sort of a group of people that advise me? And I had a person tell me very early on, and I was having a lot of success at the bank and, getting honestly a little cocky about it. And this person who ended up being a really great friend of mine said, Mike, you haven't been disappointed yet here. And trust me, you're going to be. And how you deal with that is what's going to ultimately differentiate you from other people. And so, the tendency is when we don't get our way is to whine about it, complain about it, cry about it, grown about it, and then not to be self-reflective, to say, maybe I didn't get my way because I wasn't ready for it, actually. Or, maybe candidly a higher power had something more in mind for you than that specific opportunity. Maybe the door was closed for a reason. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was closed in a completely unjust way. And in fact, when it's closed in an unjust way, that's when you really have an opportunity for your character to grow, because, hardship, disappointment, not getting your way, having an injustice, that's when we really have an opportunity to stand out. And I would tell you, this person that gave me this advice, I'll never forget years later, and I don't want to get into too much of the details, but he had the opportunity, so to speak, to exhibit his own advice to me. And he was put in a really, really difficult spot, I think unfairly. And I remember he showed up to work the very next day, walked the hallways, held his head high, and, went out of his way to congratulate other people that maybe have gotten something ahead of him. And I watched how he did that, and I've always thought, wow, that was really amazing. And so, yeah, I've had some disappointments as well, and I've had an opportunity to reflect on what he said and watch other people and how they deal with it. And it's not easy. We tend to, maybe speaking for myself, you tend to have a little bit of a woe is me attitude sometimes when things don't go your way. And nobody's perfect, so you're going to have those moments, but you want to have less of those moments, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that your character, your true character, shows when things aren't going your way. So
Right.
thanks
Right.
for those comments. I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to give you a second to think about it. I'm going to ask you if you've had any career-defining moment while you're thinking about it. We're winding up the interview portion. I'm going to ask the young leaders to use the chat box if you've got a question, and we'll come to you after Mike tells us whether he's had a career-defining moment.
Yeah, for me, the era that I would point to would be sort of the Great Recession. Coming out of 07, 08, 09, 10, those 2.5, 3 years were for sure the hardest 3 years I've spent in my career. I would, there were some things that, on an individual basis that, right before this all happened, I was promised. And, the company, and I don't blame the company at all, I'm still here, was not able to deliver for me what they told me they would. And I ended up having to wait like 3 years actually and I don't want to get into all of the different things, but different things that were supposed to happen for me individually that didn't happen. And I had to wait 3 years for that. And I had actually made some life choices thinking that they were going to happen. So it caused me to struggle a little bit more personally than those 3 years. But, I just looked at it and I said, look, the whole world is sort of going through this hardship. I'll never forget, I was driving home from work one time, and I was reflecting on the day, and, we deal with a lot of individual customers that are running businesses and whatnot. And a lot of those conversations in that era were really hard as well. A lot of the companies were really struggling, and you're having to have really difficult counseling type of conversations with people. And I remember driving home and I'm thinking, man, I was kind of honestly feeling a little sorry for myself. And something hit me, and just basically said, what does it matter with you? Like, your bad day is like 99% of the world's best day, And honestly, I do actually know a couple of you on this call, but many of you I don't know. I would suspect all of us collectively on this call, and there may be a few exceptions to this, our bad day is the rest of the world's good day, So it just, again, going back to perspective in terms of how much abundance we experience here in the United States, how much abundance we experience. I take it that most of you are working, you're on this call. Maybe you're not, maybe you've suffered, maybe you're laid off right now in this pandemic that we're in. And by the way, I hope you're all staying healthy and your families are blessed as well. But just sort of that perspective. So I got through that 3 years, and I sort of had a mental adjustment that I went through. And it ended up, when I look back on it, and I look back on how I had an opportunity, again, going back to what I was telling you about my friend, I had an opportunity to, because people knew I didn't get what I was supposed to get, so to speak. And I still showed up every day. I kept showing up. I had a smile on my face for the most part, not every day. And I tried, and we did a great job for the community. We did a great job for the customers. We helped a lot of people get from one side of the abyss to the other side. And I look back on that from a personal growth perspective, as well as from what we did as a company. For me, that would be the defining the moment or the era, I would say.
Good. Give us your thoughts. You're on the front lines, certainly helping out lots of small businesses in Detroit. Kind of put this into context, this COVID-19, the effect on the region's economy and the state of Michigan. Of course, you're president of Michigan. What are your thoughts on the recovery?
Well, I mean, this is a really tough situation. You know, I've been in business, so to speak, since the early 90s. So I went through a recession really almost as soon as I started in my career. And then there was another recession in the early 2000s. And there was the Great Recession that I just talked about. So 9/11 in the early 2000s, then the Great Recession, and then this. This is very different than, the past ones. And it reminds me of an expression. This is not my expression, but somebody one time said, if you've experienced one recession, you've experienced one recession. They're not all the same, and so this one is very different. To have everything just sort of slam down to zero, like overnight, is really difficult. Now, I put it into two different buckets. So like the medium-sized companies, the industrial companies, the companies that were around in the Great Recession, the lessons that came out of that around being nimble, reacting fast, having good capitalization, not too much debt, I think that's going to really pay off for that group of companies. The very small end, though, the restaurants, the shoe store, or, the really, really small micro businesses, they're in a tough way right now. I think the PPP program is going to help them. I think it was a good program. It's a tough one, though, because if you're closed, or if there's nothing for your employees to do, the program isn't directly applicable. Helpful, but not as helpful as maybe it could be. I know Congress is looking at making some changes there. So there's going to be some real challenges. There's clearly fallout, and we're doing everything we can to help people, again, go from one side to the other. I hate to say it, but not everybody is going to be able to go from one side to the other. I know, I can tell you from myself, and I know a lot of the other bankers, even in some of our competitor institutions, I think we're all feel the same way, in the sense that we really want to do the right thing and help as many as we possibly can.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts on that, and also for you and your team's efforts on that. We've got a question from Marletta from the Children's Center, one of our Young Leader board members, actually. So Marletta, why don't you unmute yourself and take it away?
Thank you, Mike, so much on behalf of everyone on this call today. We really appreciate it. You sound very spiritually grounded. Mindfulness seems to be important to you. So I'm just curious, how do you plan for your day? You did speak about the meditation piece, but there's so many things that can get on top of the calendar every day. There's just more noise that comes out. So how do you strategize to make sure you're the most effective you can be with the demands you have on your plate?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate that. Actually, that goes to earlier. Somebody said, or Steve asked about who gives good advice. I had an opportunity to have 4 or 5 lunches when I got my current position with our prior CEO, Gene Miller, and he sat with me and he, in his advice, he actually had 2 pieces of advice for me, which I thought, wow, these are really different. One was, don't forget your wife, because you can forget your spouse pretty easily when you get caught up in a busy position. But his other one was, control your schedule. So to your question, exactly. And everybody sort of has a different way of doing it. And I'm not perfect at doing it, but the way I try to do it is I try on my calendar, and I put this way out ahead of time, and I block a period of the time of every day. And for me, it's usually between noon and 2, and it's just blocked. Now, that doesn't mean I don't put anything on there in between noon and 2. It just means, I'm blessed. I have an assistant, but other people can see my calendar. They just know they can't put anything on there between noon and 2 without getting my specific permission. So that gives me a little bit of a gap in the middle of the day that I control. I can put something on it or not. It's my choice to do that. And so that's the main method I use. Over in prior years, I've tried to do that with whole days, and I just found it was difficult. I was trying to do that for like an entire day, where I would block it. And actually, now that you raised the question, maybe I'll try to go back and do that again. but it's usually just those 2 hours, and that works pretty well. The other thing I do, you said, how do I plan? I don't, it's nothing fancy, but I have a list, and it's a to-do list, and I have categories on there. And so I have customer items, I have community items, I have colleague items, I have personal items, and I just keep my list running, and I refresh it and I scratch it off. I don't use any technology for that. I just use a yellow pad and I constantly update it, and that's me.
Thanks, Marletta. Thanks, Mike. Spencer's got a question. He's got his hand up.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for taking questions and joining us today. I'm curious, you kind of alluded to how the medium-sized businesses versus smaller ones are certainly going to experience a much different set of circumstances. What do you think the results of that will be as it relates to leadership opportunities with younger people? Basically, do you see the entrepreneurial spirit coming through yet? Is that still a little bit further off?
Boy, sometimes you get questions and they're framed in ways you haven't really thought about. I got to tell you, thank you for the question, by the way, Spencer. I haven't had, I'd have to think about that a little bit. I would maybe answer it in a different way, in the sense that I would say just demographics right now. If you look at the population, and I think just generally speaking, pretty big opportunity for the younger generation, because there's more exiting the workforce on the other end than it's coming in. And so if you remember, right before COVID hit, I mean, there was the lowest unemployment of all time, and that was how the economy was sort of structured right before this happened. And a lot of that relates to demographics. And so that demographic didn't go away because of COVID. So I think, when the economy connects back up and gets running back in full, whenever that is, and I don't know when that is, I think you're going to find there's going to be a tremendous continuing opportunity out there. And by the way, there's always opportunity for people that work hard, do the right thing, that are smart, that are, hungry. I have a high level of confidence that you're going to find great opportunities, just generally speaking, if that's your character.
Thanks. Another question, Katrina from General Motors. Katrina, do you want to ask the question?
Sorry, I'm a little slower with the technology. So I just wanted to ask, in general, how do you encourage people on your team, maybe potentially at work or, other teams that you lead, whether that's outside of work, to go against the grain or to raise bold new ideas, even if, for example, they're unpopular?
Thank you, Katrina, for the question. That's another one that it's easy to say the right thing in that answer, and to sit there and go, do I actually do that? I mean, I'd almost have to say, you'd have to maybe ask some of the people that work for me, but I try to do that. I tend to be pretty direct. So I would just tell you, as a personal style, as long as you understand it, and when you get to know me and you know that I'm direct, and that I move from one thing to the next, and I don't have long memories in regards to, in spite of what I said earlier about deeper topics, I don't have long memories around mistakes. So it's rare that I would be bringing up somebody's prior mistake. I would tell you that's one thing I do. I'm more around a solution, hey, let's figure out the solution and let's move on. So I try to model that. And I always look at it like, if the way I kind of try to manage it, if somebody gave a good effort and they didn't blow off the assignment, and gave it their all, and it didn't work out, like can happen, I'm not going to, generally speaking, hold that against somebody, and I never really have. So I hope people know that. Where I have a problem is if somebody doesn't put out the effort, or is not operating out of integrity in terms of raising their hands and saying I have an issue. So that's one thing I do. I would tell you, when I conduct a meeting, at least with my direct reports, I always go around the table and I ask everybody, what are your thoughts on this? And I try as best I can in those meetings to, even when I'm leading off a topic, I'll explain hey, this is what the topic is, and here's 2 points of view on it. and I'm looking for your input. I'll tell them I have my, because I generally reach a conclusion pretty fast. That's actually a fault of mine. But I'll tell them up front, hey, I think I know what I want to go on this, but I'd like to hear from you. So those are a couple of things I try to do.
That's great. Mike, if you've got time, we've got one final question, and that's Dave Stahl from Plant Moran.
Okay.
I get to sneak in there. Thanks, Steve. And thanks, Mike, for doing this. Great to spend the time with you. My question, I guess, is, when you talked about training your mind and all the reading you do and kind of the ideas that generally will produce in a large organization like yours, there's probably only so many you can bring to the finish line and influence others to follow you in. How do you strategize, prioritize, kind of pick and choose the things that you really want to pursue and bring to your organization and get other people to come on board? Because I'm sure there's so many that pop up that sound great, but you kind of have to prioritize from there.
Boy, yeah, David, every question today has been great. So thank you for all the questions that you've asked me. I'd tell you they're challenging. So how do I sort of pick the direction or pick which one I want to go with or whatever? A lot of times I look at impact and I look at feasibility, the combination of the two together, so if somebody's bringing forth an idea and it has a realistic opportunity to work and it makes an impact, though that intersection is kind of what I look at. Usually not going to be too much in favor for like the dream shot or the Hail Mary pass, or, if only this could work, wouldn't this be great? Usually I'm not going to go for those. Part of it is the wiring, as a banker, we tend to have a little bit more of a conservative tilt in terms of risk, but so I personally might not be as big of a risk taker as some other leaders might be. I would share that with you. So there are other people that would, see a canyon and just boom, jump right into that. I'm probably not that person that would do that. So I'm going to look at feasibility and impact. And if those come together, that's going to get me excited.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Mike. We're going to set you free. We promised we'd let you go at 2:30. We've broken that promise at 2:34, but thank you for your terrific words of advice and for your time today. We'll hope to see you soon. Thank you also for your leadership as a board member of the Detroit Economic Club.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Steve. It was great to be with all of you, and I wish you well, and can't wait to maybe getting to meet you in person, once everything is lifted. So keep it going. Thank you.